You like a good mystery every once in a while? You're a fan of mystery novels and the like? I got to tell you, for so many years, all I read was nonfiction. History, political science, Jewish books, everything but mysteries. And my interest in mysteries actually kind of happened surreptitiously in an unusual way, almost, if you will, by default. About 15 years ago, I volunteered as what they call a rabbi in residence for a week at a summer camp here in Los Angeles. And I found I had some evenings free, which was really kind of nice. So one night I wandered into the library at the camp and I looked around at the books, just what you'd expect there to be: Bibles and Jewish books and history and religion and all sorts of stuff. And Jewish summer camp is intense and everything is Jewish and it's wonderful, but I kind of wanted a break. Looking around to read something different, and frankly, there weren't whole lot of choices in this library. So I noticed in the corner, really in the corner, there was a book written by a man who I had heard of, but I didn't really know what he wrote. His name was somewhat vague to me. The title of the book, I think, was called Kill Me If You Can, right? And the author was a guy named Patterson, James Patterson. You all know who he is. I know who he is now because he's I think 400 million copies, or literally something like that. So I pick up this book, but I feel a little self-conscious walking around the camp with a book, Kill Me If You Can, right? I don't want to be seen by the campers and I don't want to be seen by the counselors. So I decided to go to a quiet corner of the camp. Anyway, I'm sure that after giving it 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to return the book to its proper shelf. 3 hours later, I'm not a fast reader, so about 3 hours later, fully engrossed in this page turner and trying to figure out who done it, I fall asleep with the book on my stomach, go to the bunk, go back to sleep, wake up early the next morning, take it to a kind of a coffee shop off site, and there, away from the prying eyes of any counselors or campers, I finished the book, Kill Me If You Can. Imagine my disappointment the next afternoon when I went in looking for more Patterson books and there was nothing there. But that was my introduction to reading mysteries. And since then, I've read a good number of them, and I've become a fan in particular of an author named Daniel Silva. Now, the protagonist, for those of you who know or who don't know, is a fellow named Gabriel Allon, and Allon is an interesting figure. His cover as a spy is that he is an art restorer, right? But what he does for a living is he's the head of the Israeli Secret Service, right? And you follow Allon all around the world, and Daniel Silva's books come out about a year, once a year. It takes him about a year, at least in recent years, to write a book, and they come out every summer. And I'm eagerly awaiting the publication of the next one. Well, anyway, if you're into mysteries at all, if you're into spy novels at all, you will not be disappointed in reading the Torah portion this week. Shlach lecha. Not a bad segue, huh? Let me set the scene for you because it's really pretty dramatic, and it really is a spy. It takes place, the Israelites are in the desert. They are at the threshold of entering the promised land, and Moses sends 12 spies out ahead to check out the land, right? Makes sense. Now, mind you, the 12 men that he sends are not just chosen at random. They are the top representatives of each of the 12 tribes, including leaders like Joshua, including Caleb. There are 12 leaders, 12 tribes represented. And Moses sends these leaders off with very specific instructions. Let me read to you what Moses says to them. This is from the Torah. See the land. How is it? And the people who live there. Is it strong or is it weak? Is it few or is it numerous? And how is the land where they dwell? Is it good or is it bad? And how are the cities in which they dwell? Are they open or are they fortified? And how is the land? Is it fertile or is it lean? Are there trees in it or not? And you shall strengthen yourselves and you shall take the fruit of the land. So basically, in 3 words, check it out and come back with a report. So off they go. And guess how many days they're gone for? 40. I am going to give a sermon, God willing, one day on the number 40 in Judaism. 40 days and 40 nights, Moses is up getting the Torah, right? It rains during the flood, 40 days and 40 nights. There's so many 40s. So they're away for 40 days. Now I imagine all the Israelites knew that they were gone. I mean, after all, when your leaders flee the country, or your people, you know they're away, and they knew where they were. So imagine the angst among the people waiting to hear the report that they're going to give when they return. Now, they decide to give the report not just to Moses and to Aaron. They decide to share their report 40 days later among all the people. So imagine our people who had been so persecuted in Egypt, who finally ran away from Pharaoh and the Egyptian army. I picture them sitting on the edge of their seats, waiting to hear of the report of the promised land that they're about to enter, the land that God promised them. And this is what the spies say to them. And this too is what the Torah records. We arrived at the land. This is in front of everybody. They say that we arrived at the land to which you sent us, speaking to Moses and Aaron. And indeed, it flows with milk and honey. And this is its fruit. But the people who dwell there in the land are powerful. The cities are greatly fortified. And we also saw their offspring of the giant, Amalek, dwells in the area of the south. The Hittite, the Jebusite, and the Amorite dwell on the mountain. And the Canaanite dwell by the sea and on the bank of the Jordan. Amalek, by the way, is the great feared enemy of the Israelite people. And the other nations that I mentioned, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, they're powerful people. And they're not people likely to just easily surrender the land to the Israelites. Imagine how deflated they must have felt. They had come all this way to hear that this land is not going to be a very hospitable place. Then one man, Caleb, silenced the people. He says, we can do it. We can honor the land. We can conquer the land. The response? He shouted down. The people are now hysterical. They're convinced it would have been better to stay home in Egypt. And they even say, let's return to Egypt. And they go even further. They say, we need a better leader. Let's get rid of Moses. And Moses and Aaron are apoplectic. They fall, doesn't say that in the Torah, that's Woznica's interpretation. They were apoplectic. They fall on their faces in front of the people as if to implore to them, don't go back to Egypt. Then for a moment, there's a reprieve. And Joshua adds his voice along with Caleb, and they speak to the community together. They say, listen, the land is very good. If God wants us to have it, he'll bring us there and he'll give it to us. Don't fear. So what's the response to Caleb and to Joshua? I love this. I absolutely love this. This is the response in the words of the Torah. The entire assembly said, let's pelt them with stones. Nice. Let's pelt them with stones. God is so angry that God says to Moses, how long will this people provoke me? And how long will they not have faith in me? Despite all the signs, all the miracles I've done in front of them, I will destroy them. And then God basically says to Moses, we're going to start with a whole new people, a stronger people. I'm going to keep you around. You'll be their leader, but I'm going to wipe out this people, and we're going to start all over again. Plot gets better. You know what Moses says to God? He says, if you wipe them out, when the Egyptians hear about it, the Egyptians are going to think that you were so weak that you couldn't fight the Canaanites and all their gods. And now Moses goes further. He says, forgive them. Moses is extraordinary. Moses is saying, God, this is really bad PR for you. You are not going to look good in the eyes of the Canaanites and the Jebusites and the Hittites. They're going to think you're a weak God. Pretty powerful, Moses' response. And God changes his mind and forgives the people. Sort of. Not completely. God decides that these people, the one who saw all the miracles that God had performed for them, and when they fled Egypt and the 10 plagues and the Red Sea parting, this group isn't worthy to enter the promised land. The next generation is going to enter it. They're not going to make it. They're going to die in the desert along the way. And you know how long they're going to roam the desert for? 40 years. One, God says, for each day that the spies will be away. Except, I told you it's a mystery, for Joshua and Caleb. They will enter. This is what the Torah said about Caleb in God's words. Caleb, quote, had a different spirit in him and followed me with a good heart, with a full heart. Interesting. That's what God said. Caleb, God said, had a different spirit in him and followed me with a full heart. I really take each word of the Torah seriously. We're told there are no superfluous words in the Torah, so I got kind of puzzled by this verse, and I really thought about it. The full heart, I think we can all understand, right? Caleb had enduring faith, and that would have been enough, right? But it doesn't just say that. God said Caleb, quote, had a different spirit and a full heart. Ruach acheret, a different spirit. So I really began to think, what's the different spirit? What did God mean by that? After all, it was so important that it saved Caleb, which means it saved in many ways the Jewish people. What did God mean by a different spirit? What was that trait? So important that Caleb would not have prevailed without it. So important that God listed it right next to a ruach acheret, a full heart. I'll tell you what I think it is. I think it's moral courage. Caleb had moral courage. It's a trait that was exceedingly rare then, and it is exceedingly rare today. Moral courage means that there are times when you have to stand up so firmly for your ideals, flying in the face of the overwhelming majority of people. Moral courage means you're not nearly as interested in being liked or loved as the outcome of what happens. I have to tell you, it doesn't take a lot of moral courage to speak to others who basically agree with you. For a progressive to stand in front of progressives and say what they want to hear, that's not moral courage. For a conservative to stand up in front of conservatives and say what they expect them to hear doesn't take a lot of moral courage. A rabbi I know, not a rabbi here, some time ago gave a sermon, quite a political sermon. He received a standing ovation from about 85% of the congregants. But that rabbi knew he was going to receive and be embraced by the congregation by his words. That didn't take any courage. What takes courage is to stand up to your own people and say you're wrong. That takes moral courage, because you know what? It means you're not going to be embraced. It means you're not going to be liked. Chances are, if you get a standing ovation at the end of your sermon, people probably agreed with you pretty much when they walked in. By the way, it doesn't mean you shouldn't give me one at any point. If you ever feel in the mood, so moved, at the end of high holidays, feel free. But moral courage means holding up a mirror to yourself and to your people. That's what we're supposed to do. That's what leaders, all of us, are supposed to do. Have moral courage. It is exceedingly rare because the human being naturally wants to be liked. But without moral courage, good never prevails. It can't prevail. When being liked or being loved or getting adulation becomes the end in itself, becomes more important than moral courage, it never prevails. And God's treatment of Caleb, God singling him out and saying, you're going to make it to the promised land, suggests to me that moral courage is deeply valued in the eyes of God. We don't usually value moral courage at the time. Sometimes it takes years or a generation. Often it's only in retrospect. It's kind of, I realize, like Van Gogh, right? One of the things we know about Van Gogh is he lived as a pauper. He was supported by his uncle. And at one point he was actually churning out a painting almost every other day. He would spend his last couple of years in a mental asylum. And I think in that 1 year, he painted 132 paintings, right? And one day he's allowed to walk around certain grounds, and he saw some flowers, some irises, and he painted the irises. Some of you may know that painting today. It's worth, I don't know, a couple $100 million. No one appreciated Van Gogh in his day. It was years later that he began to become appreciated. Similarly, the prophets of the Torah, they were constantly rebuking. They were not beloved by their own people. But it's the prophets of the Torah that we read today. It's their moral courage we look upon today as arbiters and a way to live our life in the future. The next time you're in the mood for a good mystery, don't think twice about picking something off the shelf. We're blessed today. There are so many extraordinary writers and so many fertile minds. And I have to tell you more personally, Silva's book, his next volume, comes out on July 16th. I'll pre-order it again. It's called The New Girl, and the publicity says it's, quote, a stunning new thriller of vengeance, deception, and betrayal. I got to tell you, I can't wait. And speaking of mysteries that have vengeance, deception, and betrayal, stay tuned, because there's a thriller out there about a rebellion. It's actually a mutiny, and it's led, this is true, by a rich, egotistical man who wants to throw an extraordinary leader for his own maniacal purposes. It's really good, and it also comes out next week. But you can get a sneak preview. You see, the man's name is Korach, and it's in next week's Torah portion. And stay tuned, because you'll never guess what happens. Shabbat Shalom.